Today, we're starting a brand new series called Broken Heroes. If this is your first time here, what we like to do with our messages is kind of group them together under a common theme or idea, and we call that a series. And so if this is your first time, this is a great week to join us because it's the first part of the series called Broken Heroes. And I'll let the cat out of the bag right off the bat. What we're doing is looking at some major flaws in some of our favorite heroes. Major flaws in our favorite heroes. And I think what you'll see is that though these stories were written hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there is something about human nature that has been the same all throughout human existence. So before we jump into it though, I'll tell you a story, all right? So a few weeks ago, I went skiing again. All right, second time this year. I told you I'm not really a skier. I still don't consider myself a skier, but we went again. Now, the first time I went, it was just me and one of my good friends, and so I was trying to figure it out on my own, right? Didn't know what I was doing, but it's just me. Well, this time, it was my whole family, like me, my wife, Allie, my daughter, Mia, she's 9, and my son, Logan, he's 7, and a bunch of our friends. And so I'm not just out there on my own. There are like other people involved in this. And so we put our kids in lessons the first day. We were skiing for 2 days. The first day we put our kids in lessons, and Allie wasn't really into the whole skiing situation, so she just kind of hung back, and I was off on my own, just trying not to kill myself on the mountains. And then the second day, we were with the kids, and now they have their, the little the techniques that they learn, like the pizza feet and the French fries and all that great stuff that they learn in the little class. And now it's my responsibility to take them where they want to go, which is not a great situation. But at the end of the day, we were with our group. We made it through 2 days of skiing. It was dark out. It was nighttime. And we decided, since it's the last day, hey, let's go night skiing. Because day skiing wasn't hard enough. No, but it was fun, it was cool, it was lit up, it was a unique experience, so we decided to do it. Well, my son Logan, who's 7, he wasn't quite there yet, so he stayed back with Allie. But my daughter Mia and I went up to the top of the mountain with our group, and we went. Now, she had skied for the first time the day before, but she picked it up pretty quickly, and so we gave it a shot. Now, we stayed at the back of the pack, because that seemed to be the safest, and I'm just behind her, and I'm watching. And she's doing her little S that she's supposed to do. If you know skiing, you got to make an S. If you go straight for too long, you pick up speed, lose control, not a good situation. So I'm just watching her, and she's going great. And I'm cheering her on. It's fantastic. I can't believe she learned how to do this in just one day. It's wonderful. Well, one of my friends who was with us was off to the side. He was off the trail, but he took out his camera, and because we were all going down the same trail at the same time, he filmed it. And he's cheering everyone on. And my daughter Mia is doing her thing, and she sees him, and I guess she wanted to make sure she didn't go anywhere near him. So for a split second, she decided not to turn and to go straight. And because she didn't turn, she started to pick up speed. And then it became harder for her to make the turn. And things started to get pretty bad pretty quickly. And all of this is on film. And you can hear me yelling behind her, make the turn. First it was the calm dad voice, And it's make the turn. Make the turn. And I'm yelling, and my voice is getting louder and louder. Now, something you need to know about this mountain is the trail is along the side of the mountain. And so if you go off the trail on the right side, you go uphill. And so it's, you hit the trees and kind of stop there. But if you go left, you go downhill because of gravity. So if you go off, you want to go toward the right. Well, I'm watching her, and I'm yelling to make the turn, and I see the direction she's headed, and she's headed toward the left. And I realized she's going off the side of this trail, down the mountain. And as soon as I realized she was going to go, I tucked my poles and decided I was going to go right after her. And so she went flying off the side of the trail, and I went after her. Now, don't worry, nobody dies in this story. But it was one of the scariest experiences for me as a parent watching her go off. And I knew I was going after her. I realized afterwards, like, that probably wasn't the smartest thing to just go flying after her. But at the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. Fortunately, she landed in this little pile. There was this little mound there that stopped her from continuing to go down. And I picked her up, I dusted her off, and I put her back on the trail with the help of some other parents, and she skied back down the mountain. And it was actually pretty cool. She made it to the bottom. She got down there. She had some scrapes on her face from actually earlier in the day, but she had finished. She made it. And it was a cool picture of just kind of like pushing through. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because I had to get a story out of that experience. No, because everything was fine. Everything was great. Everything was going wonderfully until it wasn't. And in an instant, everything fell apart. In an instant, things got really bad, really fast. And the hero that we're looking at today is someone who goes through that same process. Things are going really well. He's on the right track. People love him. But in an instant, things get really bad, really fast, and no one sees it coming. The person we're talking about today is a guy by the name of David. David. Now, David is someone that people have looked up to literally for hundreds and hundreds of years. David was someone who came, in case you don't know, he came hundreds of years before Jesus. In fact, Jesus would have grown up hearing stories about David. Jesus would have looked up to David. Like when I was a kid, in my room, on my bedroom wall, I had this big picture of Michael Jordan, and it said, surprise, it said victory. It was one of those motivational things, and he's like this, he's doing his little fist bump, right? And he's my hero, so he was on my wall. Jesus grew up with a poster of David on his wall in his bedroom. Probably not, but that's the idea. He grew up, he was respected, he was highly esteemed. People wanted to be like David. Now, David, when we first meet him, he's described in a way no one else is described. We're told that David is someone, he's a man after God's own heart. Not after like chasing after, but after like there is something about his character and desires that bears a striking resemblance to God himself. He is deeply, deeply compassionate. He is genuinely humble. And he has this radical kind of faith, this unshakable trust in God. His appearance isn't all that impressive. He's a little guy. In fact, he worked for his dad. He was a shepherd. He was the youngest in his family. People weren't impressed by his appearance, but he had incredible courage. He lived a remarkable life. You might have heard the story of David and Goliath, right? This is the David from David and Goliath. When he was young, his brothers are out to war. They're trying to protect their people. And there's this war hero, this giant, his name's Goliath, and everyone's afraid to take this guy on. So David goes out there in this remarkable display of faith and courage, and he takes this guy on, and he beats him. And from there, things just get better and better for David. He's successful. He's victorious. He gets in really good with the king. The king learns to love David. David has this amazing career. People respect him and follow him. In fact, there comes a point in David's life where the crowds, the people in his country, like his peers, they would cheer for him, and in their cheers, they would say that he was better than the king, Saul, the current king at the time, which didn't really work out well for David, because then the king got jealous of him. And eventually, the king wanted to take David's life. So David goes running out into the wilderness, and eventually he gets to this point where he has the ability to take the life of this king. He's got the ability to kill him. He's literally right behind him while King Saul's going to the bathroom, and he chooses not to kill him because he's humble. And he's like, it's not my job. He wouldn't take the life of a king. He does, and the reason I'm telling you this is because he does things that are so like uncommon and virtuous and good and attractive, and he wins the favor of everybody. Everybody. He's a man after God's own heart. But then things fall apart in an instant. And here's the story. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings go to war, David sent Joab. Now, Joab would have worked for David. He was one of his high-ranking officials, a leader in the military. And so David sends Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. In the ancient world, there would be this period of time in the year where you went on the defense of your people. You went out to protect your people. It was a crazy world back then, but this was a normal thing. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. It says, one evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. Right, he's got a nice setup. David is now the king of Israel. Saul, who was the king, is no longer the king, and David has taken his spot. And so he's living in the palace. He's walking around on the roof of the palace, and we're told that from the roof, he sees a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. So the man comes back, the one that David sent out to find out about her. The man says, she's Bathsheba, that's her name, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, there are a group of people that David worked with. They were known as David's mighty men. These people are in connection with the mighty men. David knows those guys. It says, then David sent messengers to get her. He calls for her, and she comes to the palace. And we're told she came to him, and he slept with her. This woman who's married, he sleeps with her. Makes a mistake. But now David's got to decide. All right, where do we go from here? Right? He was in a situation, he did something that he maybe wouldn't normally do, but now what? He finds out pretty soon that she's pregnant. She's going to have a baby. And now what? How do we cover this up? His reputation's on the line. This man after God's own heart might lose his reputation. And so David sets up this whole cover-up. It says, David sent this word to Joab. He says, send me Uriah the Hittite, her husband. And Joab sent him to David. So Uriah comes, and says Uriah came to him, and David asked him how Joab was. Just, small talk. He knows, he's full of baloney. He knows how Joab is. He's tight with Joab. How the soldiers were and how the war was going. He's trying to come up with a reason to have Uriah there. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. Which is a weird suggestion, but he says go home, right? So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. David's buttering him up here. He wants him to go home and sleep with his wife so that no one will know that he did. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and didn't go down to his house. He wouldn't. David was told Uriah didn't go home. His plan's not working. He asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Like, aren't you tired? Why didn't you go home? That's not my plan here. Uriah said to David, the ark, that's not Noah's ark, that's an ark that was like this holy thing to those people. The ark and Israel and Judah, his people, are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. My guys are out there. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. He's displaying this remarkable loyalty to his peers and to David and to his country. He's everything in this moment that David is not. He's fiercely loyal, ironically, to David. And so he won't go to his home. He doesn't know what David's trying to do here. So David takes this a step further. He says, okay, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I'll send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. He's trying to get him to go home and sleep with his wife. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He didn't go home. For the second time, David's cover-up fails. So he takes things to the next level. It says, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he'll be struck down and die. And that's what happens. Joab obeys David. He doesn't know what's going on with Uriah. But for whatever reason, Uriah is thrown out there in front of everyone. He's killed. And so the question is, how in the world can this happen? If you're someone who's been in the church for a long time, maybe you've heard the story of David and Bathsheba, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right, David, he's that hero, he's the guy we love so much. He did that thing with Bathsheba that was kind of messed up, but for the most part, but really, this is a serious thing. This is not a broken hero. He's a straight up villain in this story. If you're reading the biography of Uriah, he's an oppressive, selfish murderer. And so the question is how? How did he get there? Right? How do you go from being deeply compassionate, from being the kind of person, remember I told you earlier, there was a moment where David could kill someone who was trying to take his own life, the King Saul, and not killing him put his own life in danger, but he wouldn't do it. How does he go from not killing that guy to killing someone who was fiercely loyal to him, completely innocent, and doing everything perfectly right? How do you get there? How do you go from being genuinely humble to committing an egregious abuse of power? How do you go from being the kid with unshakable faith to living like God doesn't know and doesn't care? How do you get there? The amazing thing about this story is it has so much for us to take away. Whether you're a person of faith or not, there's so much about David's situation that could help us in our own struggles. But I think the first thing we all need to see in the story of David is that all of us have the potential to become someone we never thought we would be. Unless we're aware of it, aware of that potential, and taking steps to make sure that we don't. So the question is, what went wrong? What went wrong? Well, a few things. First, in the very first line, the ancient writers were super sparing with their words. They're not like creative, descriptive writers that waste a lot of ink. They get right to the point. We're told in the very first line, in the spring, when kings go to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. In other words, in the spring, when kings go to war, King David didn't go to war. When kings go out to protect their people, David stayed home. The first place David went wrong was simply not going to work. None of this would have happened if David was doing what he was supposed to be doing. And I think for us, the takeaway here is that he's lacking purpose. There's a clear lack of purpose. Now, here's what I mean by this. In general, we as people, we are stronger in pursuit of something than we are resisting something. For me personally, I've seen the most growth in my own life when I'm trying to become something rather than when I'm trying not to be something else. So the question here, practically speaking, is are you pursuing good or are you resisting what's bad? Right? Especially in the church world. A lot of times we think church, we think don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. But what about the do's? Right? Even if you take Tom's example from last week. If you were here last week, Tom talked about the mouth and gossip and slander and cutting people down. And so sure, maybe you're like, okay, I gotta like not cut people down with my words. And that might work. If you're in a conversation and maybe you're talking to your significant other and you like wanna say the thing and you're like, just gonna like bite your tongue and not say it. And that'll work for a little while. But you will be so much more successful if you don't just concentrate on not saying the bad thing, but if you go into that conversation feeling like, I'm gonna say what I need to say, but I wanna make sure this person leaves this interaction feeling built up. If you intentionally build someone up, you will not be tearing them down. We're better pursuing good than we are resisting bad. Even in the verse Tom talked about last week, the Apostle Paul says, don't use your words to tear people down. Use them to build people up. Right away, he shows you what you should go after he explains what you should resist. And this is true across all areas of life. Dave Ramsey, the financial guy, talks about this. He's like, if you've got an issue with spending, right? Like impulsive spending, and you're trying not to, it's not good to go like see something you really want, like the latest Apple product, which I'm guilty of, and just being like, I'm gonna try not to buy that thing because I really don't want to spend that money. He's like, no, like redirect your focus and attention to what you want. Why you're trying to resist that. Put a picture of the boat or the house or whatever you're going after in front of you. And if you pursue that, you'll accidentally be resisting the things that you don't want in your life. Pursue good, don't avoid bad. Statistically speaking, right? Okay, here's another example. Men, husbands are most likely to cheat on their wives when they're very pregnant or right after they've had a baby. Statistically speaking, that's when husbands are most likely to cheat on their wives. And so what you can do if you're in that situation is like just maybe try not to like talk to other women or like shut them out or like just try not to get near them. Or you can redirect your attention to trying to be everything you possibly can be for that person in your life during that season, knowing it's especially difficult. It's all about what you're pursuing, and when you do that, you'll resist the things you don't want to be part of. If you're single and the issue of sexual integrity is a struggle for you, and there are certain things you're like, all right, I really want to try and like not do these things. You could just like try not to do them, or you could think about like develop a picture of what you want to become. And so when you meet someone you want to spend the rest of your life with, you can think about like, these are the conversations I want to have with them. This is what I want to give to them. This is the person I want to be when I meet that person. I don't want to have all those conversations explaining all those other things. If you pursue what you want to be, it will give you the strength to resist what you don't want to be. But we can't like let go of something without grabbing onto something else. And so are you pursuing good or are you resisting bad? If David would have just gone out and done his job to the best of his ability, he wouldn't have had to resist the situation of temptation. Second thing, lack of purpose. Second thing was he was just in a bad situation. He set himself up to fail. His environment was not lending itself toward good situations. The question is your current environment working for or against you? It's the middle of the night. No one's around. He's on the roof of his palace. He's watching a woman bathe. She comes to his palace. He finds out about her. She gets there. What do you think's going to happen? He set himself up to fail. A lot of us are trying to like beat certain things in our lives, like get them out, and it's a simple change to your environment will fix your problem. I read a book not too long ago. It's called Atomic Habits by a guy named James Clear. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it. I've read it a few times. He talks about this, not necessarily right and wrong, but he's like, if there's stuff in your life you're trying not to do, if you're trying to adopt new habits, just think about your environment. If you're trying to watch less TV, put your remote in a difficult place. And where you keep your remote, put a book if you're trying to read. Like, you'd be surprised how much easier it is for you to succeed when you set up your environment that way. I was talking to some boys years ago when I was working with students. These boys, teenage boys, had this habit they were trying to break, they weren't proud of, and they were asking me, like, okay, what can I do to, like, not do this thing that I'm trying not to do? And I asked them, I was like, all right, well, what does the environment look like when you're doing that thing you're trying not to do? And they're like, well, I mean, it happens at night, in my room, in my bed, on my phone. And I was like, okay, so what if you charge your phone in the kitchen and you slept with the door open? You'd be surprised how, like, a simple change of environment situation can help you. If you're trying not to spend, leave your credit card at home. If you don't want to spend so much time on the app, delete it. You can reinstall it, but you'd be surprised just putting a little bit of difficulty in between you and the thing you don't want to do, how it so quickly can help you make progress. A bad situation, then there's this slow progression. Slow progression. David, I don't know if he was or wasn't, but it doesn't seem like he's thinking about where his road ends. He made one decision after the next. And you know what the tricky thing about this was? So many of the decisions that he made leading up to this weren't wrong, but they also weren't wise. Like, is it wrong for him to just be looking out on his rooftop in the middle of the night? No. Is it wrong for him to find out about that woman? To ask what her name is and who she's related? No. Is it wrong for him to ask her to come over and chat? No. No. But was it wise? No. And once he found himself in that position, and then he's like, okay, well, now I've got to cover it up. And he makes the decision to cover it up. And then he fails once, and he fails again. And then it's like he's got this tunnel vision, like, I just got to figure out how to cover it up. Right? It's a slow progression. I guarantee you, the day David decided to send Joab out to war instead of going, he was not thinking that was going to end in him killing someone. But it was a slow progression. If at any point he would have stopped and realized, it would have stopped everything. There's a movie, it's called Jingle All the Way. It's a Christmas movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Great movie. There's this point, the movie is about a dad. He's a good dad. He wants to buy a gift that his son really wants. He's got an issue with time management, but other than that, he's a pretty good dad. And he finds himself eventually, later on in the movie, in his neighbor's house, getting ready to steal his neighbor's son's toy from under his Christmas tree so he can give it to his own son. And he looks at it, he stops, and he goes, what am I doing? It's one small step of compromise after the next. And then he finds himself in a place where he's like, what am I doing? This is not who I am. If David at any point would have stopped and said, hold on a second, this is not the person that I am, it would have stopped the progression, but he just lets one unwise decision after the next lead him further and further. Lastly, a slow progression and also a dark secret. He makes a mistake, but then he tries to hide it. People do desperate things to hide dark secrets. Dangerous things to hide dark secrets. So the question is, if you find yourself in this place where you've made a mistake, which all of us have and will, has your big mistake become a dark secret? If you're familiar with any of the 12-step programs, you know you're only as sick as your secrets. There's a study done at the University of Texas by a guy named James Pennebaker. He found that people who shared some of their darkest secrets actually improved their physical health, their stress level. They had fewer doctor's visits simply because they got things out. They brought them to light, and it's hard, but it's healing. And you're going to have to own it. You're going to have to be real about what went wrong, but it is good for the soul, and it's the first step in the direction of peace, externally and internally. I told some of you about a year ago that when I was 16 years old, I made a terrible decision. I'm not going to share the details with you because there were other people involved, but it came from a lack of purpose, a bad situation, a slow progression, and it turned into a dark secret. I made a big mistake that involved other people, and then I lied about it. I came forward and confessed, but the confession that I made was not true. But I did that so that it would look like I was telling the truth. And I got away with it for years. And the only people that knew that I had lied and buried it were the people that were paying the price for my lie. And for years, for the rest of my high school experience, I couldn't look those people in the eye because they knew and I knew what happened. And it ate me alive. And every time I heard that name, like as an adult, every time I heard the name or the names of people involved, I'd cringe. And then I'd justify it and I'd say like, oh, you know what, there's nothing I can do now. I might as well just let it go. It's over, it's over, it's over. This is just guilt weighing me down. It's shame. I gotta let it go, I gotta let it go, I gotta let it go. Until finally, I thought about what would happen if one of them walked in here on a Sunday and saw me up here. I would look like a fake, a phony. And so in 2021, I went outside, I sat in my car, I found a person on social media, I sent them a message and set up a phone call. And it was an awkward phone call initially. It was uncomfortable. But I said, look, I lied. I need to tell you that because you knew it and I knew it. But it cost you a lot. And I want you to know I'm sorry. And I've been thinking about it for years, but I've never had the courage to own it. And that day, did it fix the past? No. But that day, something in both of us healed. Because a big mistake had become a dark secret. So my question for you today is, where are you? What do you have going on? Are there any of these that you connect with? Are you feeling like you're just trying to resist the bad? Is there good that you can pursue? Is your environment set up for you to succeed? Are you going down a road that doesn't end in a good place? Is there something you're burying that maybe you should bring to the surface? The amazing thing, we're going to talk about this in a few weeks, but the amazing thing is that like David eventually owns what he did. And you can read what's going on in his mind when he does it. It's actually written down in Psalm 51, if you want to read that. He talks about like his need for God to like give him a pure heart. He's like, cleanse me. He feels ashamed of what he's done, but he owns it and he does everything he can to make things right. And what we see from there is God making beautiful things from our broken pieces. In fact, when Jesus is announced for the very first time, you know what they say? They say that like the angels, if you know the story on Christmas, they're like, I bring you good news of great joy for all people. They're like, today in the town of David, a Savior's been born. As an adult, Jesus is walking in the street and there are people calling out for help. They're like, Jesus, Lord, Son of David. Like David is in part of Jesus' title. Things turn around and God does something beautiful through him. And so there's hope because God makes beautiful things from our broken pieces. If you haven't made a big mistake, chances are you're going to make a big mistake. And when you do, you need to know that there is a God who is there to pick you up and put you back together. There's a quote that was attributed to C.S. Lewis, but he didn't say it. But it's still a good quote, so I'll tell you. He says, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And so when all this is just a story in your life, what's the story you want to tell? I'm going to ask the band to come back up here. We're We're just about out of time. Over, actually. Some of you right now might be in a situation where maybe you've gotten off course. Like something has thrown you off, and you know it and you feel it. What we believe is that there is a God who wants you to see him as your Father, and he's right behind you, urging you to make the turn. It might be harder than it was before. You might feel like things are getting out of control, but he would urge you to make the turn because he knows where you're headed, and he knows it's a place you don't want to go. But the beautiful thing about our story is that when you don't make the turn and you fly off the trail, the whole story about Jesus is a story about him deciding he's coming after you, to pick you up in your mess, to dust you off, put you back together, and get you back on the trail. And one day, you'll get to the bottom, and you'll be scraped, and you'll have scars, and you'll have broken pieces. But I think you'll see that God does beautiful things, makes beautiful things with our broken pieces.